Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Calvin. Hi Bryan, today I submit to you Bind, Torture, Kill by Suffocation. That's not a title that instills a lot of faith that I'm going to enjoy this song. Suffocation is one of the most influential death metal bands of the 90s and onward, known both for their brutality and technicality. Their production is very raw and unpolished, but that makes their precision of their performance all the more satisfying to my ears. The song seems to be about battling inner demons, a sense of predetermined fate, desperation, and reaching a breaking point. Hope you enjoy. Find it really difficult not to read things like that a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The production's raw, they are brutal death metal, they have a song called Bind, Torture, Kill. I hope you enjoy it, man. It probably is done in good faith. They are hoping that I find some pleasure out of this, whether it's, riffs or sound or, whatever. I always have things that I enjoy about music. There's very little songs that are given to me where I'm like, that was just I did not like a single thing of that. That's pretty rare. So I don't think it was done tongue in cheek, but it's really hard not to read things like that and kind of feel like there's a little bit of a joke going on. A little bit of hey, let's throw Bryan some utterly brutal stuff he won't like, and then tell him to enjoy it. Anyways, let's dive in, see what's going on with Suffocation's Bind, Torture, Kill. We've gone through like 4 riffs already. We're only 40 seconds in. I was expecting the production to be a lot worse, but it's actually fairly clear. I can hear what the vocalist is saying, the drums are clear. The guitars are very buzzside. It does obscure a little bit of the lower end pitches, but for the most part, and everything's balanced rather nicely in the whole mix too, so. The places that the vocalist decides to emphasize are interesting because they're usually not where the rest of the band is emphasizing beats. A little bit of a tempo increase there. Shifting away from quarter note emphasis to 8th notes, 16th notes. Pulling that tempo back in. At least on the drums, the guitars are still doing 16th note stuff. come out? 2006. Very interesting. Bringing the crash symbol on those last few, that was nice. Yeah, so I mean, just based off of expectations, this was a lot better than I was guessing based off of the context for it. You know, the thing I was concerned about was the production, but it's actually the production's good here. Also said that it was known for their brutality, and yeah, there's definitely some brutal moments to this, but it also moves at such a breakneck pace. It's hard to get wrapped up in any specific idea. Just get tossed to a new one. I mean, I mentioned 40 seconds in, we had heard 3 or 4 different guitar riffs already. Absolutely bonkers. Now, granted, we ended up reusing a lot. After like the minute and a half mark, maybe 2 minute mark, I don't think there were any new riffs. But I mean, still, they're just jumping between them so quickly. If anything happens to be a bit too heavy for you, they're gonna change things up a little bit. Maybe they'll back the tempo down. Maybe they'll have a halftime feel. Maybe they'll do something a little bit more melodic with the guitars. There's a lot of changes going on in this track. So it never really reached the point of being too overwhelming. Plus, it wasn't very long either. 5 3/4 minutes. So I think the description of the song, the context, yeah, it's rather accurate. But it also set me up to expect something a little bit heavier and wilder and rawer than they were actually going to do. Not something I would check out on my own, but I didn't mind it. I didn't mind it. That's not bad for brutal death metal. I didn't mind it. Geez, I want to talk about production first. Because right off the bat, like I said, I was expecting something gnarly. And it was palatable. And in a lot of ways, actually really well done. I would call this mid to hi-fi production. The guitars themselves do have a buzzsaw sound to them, and I find it difficult to kind of hear some of the lower tones, especially when we play those 16th notes, those really fast hits in the lower range. That all kind of blurs together. I get the extra attack primarily from the bass kick, which tends to line up with it as well. But I think if it was just the guitars, I'd have a really hard time hearing each note's attack. And I would sort of just it all blur together for me. So instead of a very rigid digga da digga da digga da, I would hear more of a da 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 da. So the buzzsaw definitely, it's a lot of overdrive, it's a lot of compression, but it's a sound that I think works for them, for this atmosphere they're trying to create. And generally speaking, they only use those low tones for pedal notes to contrast with the melody that sits above that. So, I mean, there's that one part where they were doing constant 16th notes. They were doing groups of four, and three of them would be the pedal tone, and one of them would be a higher note. And that higher note changed. So if you got rid of the pedal tones, you just have this quarter note melody, changing pitch every quarter note. It's just that they put all of this aggression in between each of those notes of the melody. And on those higher notes, it tends to be very clear what pitch they're playing. So, like I said, on the whole, when everything really comes together, the muddiness of the lower end doesn't really affect the song too much. The drums are very clear. I'd say they're a bit too forward in the mix. I think that they kind of dominate some areas. But yeah, it's very clear again what they're playing. I can hear every single drum fill, every hit that they play. I think the cymbals are honestly a little too low in the mix compared to the snare and the bass, but that all comes down to personal preference. They're honestly going for this heavier, meatier sound, where I would have liked some of the levity that the cymbals have, to kind of bring the sound out of this low focus, but they're going for that low end focus. So, it would have drastically changed the feeling of the song. It works again for what they're doing. And the vocals were clear, present, and discernible. I picked out a couple of sentences in here, which I think is both the clarity of the enunciation of the words, the clarity of the performance, and the engineer's job at putting the vocals in a place and producing them in a way where I can hear what's being said. Yeah, this is pretty high fidelity production here. The only thing I never heard was the bass. My guess is that the bass was tucked in underneath the guitars, and they were probably playing something similar to what the guitars were playing a majority of the time, and it was just a bassier low-end sound that was kind of bleeding into the low-end sound that the guitars were working with on all of their pedal tones. So I'm pretty sure there's a bass in here, and I probably would notice if you gave me a version with the bass and one without. I'd be like, oh, that's where the bass is. It's filling the sound out. But it's very hard for me to ever hear it by itself, to pick it out. Oh, that's specifically the bass doing that. So yeah, the production here is very clear, and I was kind of interested in what year this came out, because I was like, dude, this is clear production, but 2006 makes sense. For some reason, when I read that this was an influential death metal band of the 90s, I was expecting an album of the 90s. But no, this has a very modern production to it. I think it works rather well. The guitar work in here is wild, but I also like the diversity of it. It comes off very strong at the beginning, and we kick into some 16th note groove early on too, but that's not the only thing we ever hear from them. There's more melodic writing in here, there's longer riffs, and like I said, we do have in that 16th note driven section, if you get rid of the 16th notes, we have that quarter note melody in there too, and that's harmonized as well. So that's a nice little thing in there. But what I want to focus on real quick regarding the guitar is the most surprising part of this song. What was that guitar solo? I don't think I've heard a death metal guitar solo use the whammy so much in a way that reminds me more of Beastie Boys than metal. No, not Beastie Boys. What am I thinking of? Is it Beastie Boys? Just making noisy sounds with the whammy bar. Maybe I can't. Maybe it is. Anyways, it just isn't a very metallic thing. At least not in my wide, but probably still, albeit limited, exposure to metal, particularly death metal, whammy bars are more of a sparse usage in general metal guitar solos, and actually general metal usage entirely. Um, we don't really get to hear too much shred in here. There's a little bit. He gets to show his chops off as far as precision and finger dexterity and stuff, but it really is only like 20% of the solo. The rest is about his ingenuity of sound creation, of using bends and different attacks, different ways to pick the strings, merged with the use of the whammy bar to create these long alien sounding tones. It almost sounds like something you would do with a mod wheel on a keyboard with maybe an distorted guitar patch going on or something like that. Something like a more death metal version of what the Dream Theater keyboardist would do. Um, it's really wild to hear it because the whole song is based around these heavy low tones and precise picking to create this aggressive tone, and aggressive playing style with the guitar. And then out of nowhere, we have this highly expressive experimental whammy bar based playing that's focused more on sound than melody or riff or aggression. It's just kind of weird, kind of out there. It's definitely experimental. And then we get a little bit of that shred, focusing more on that precise playing, traditional playing of the guitar, and then back to a little bit more of that whammy bar stuff, and then back to the meat of the song, which is traditional riff playing. And I find that to be really interesting. I'm not going to say that subjectively I liked the solo. It was different, but from an artistic perspective, I really like the decision to do that. It changes things up. It steps outside of the circle. Says, what can we do if we don't do the traditional metal style of solo? And on top of that, I do think that the technique itself is well thought out, well tread. This didn't feel experimental. This felt like something he was rather good at and went for. It was just a bit experimental in context, but he had full control over what he was doing. This is not something that was a bit rough around the edges that iteration would help smooth out. This was a really well executed way of creating this whammy bar based soloing. And I find that to be very cool. I wonder if this is sort of a signature technique of his, something he's been doing with Suffocation for years. And if so, this is something that I think sets Suffocation out, above their peers, because I've just never heard a solo like that. And I'm always going to be here for that type of experimentation. It might not be something I like, but I will always support it. Not Beastie Boys. Tom Morello, whatever band he. Why can't I think of his band? I don't know. You guys know who I'm talking about, though. He knows how to make noise, for lack of better words, unique sounds out of his guitar. And that's kind of what I felt like here. Tom Morello inspired metal solo. That's just not words I would ever expect to say. And that's kind of wild. As for the song as a whole, I like the variety in it. Like I said, right off the bat, we get a ton of different guitar riff styles, different layerings of intensity, different types of focus, whether it's just on speed or technicality. Maybe it's based on more brutal sound. Maybe it's on a little bit more of a melodic range. The drumming is all over the place. The dude has blast beats. He has a groove. He has noise, just like hitting as many things as he can. And everything in between has these beautiful fills to move from one style to the next. We have halftime, we have double time. It is just extremely varied for being, a brutal song that kind of keeps that heavy weight and intensity throughout the entire track. It is rather varied, and I find that to be a pro. I think it's difficult to create something that retains this vibe but still finds ways to fluctuate, to sort of bend and maneuver within that rather tight constraint of what your music is going to be. The only thing that doesn't really bend at all is the vocals, and I think that's where the guitars come into play. The vocals end up being exceptionally static. They just are. There's this low growl the entire song, does not change. It's a static component to the track. And I think the wide variety of guitar work that we have in here, and the occasional harmony and the shifting time feels, the movement from faster brutality focusing on 16th notes to slower, just rule of cool sounding riffs, and how quickly we move between all these creates that contrast, that dynamic quality to sort of counteract the monotonous, monotonity, the monotonous component that the vocals bring to the song. And it balances it out. One is pretty much completely static, one is highly dynamic, and where they could have, weighed the song in one way or another, it balances it. And I think that works well. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't have rather had more dynamic vocals on this, but it's just one of those things about death metal that I don't think we're ever going to see eye to eye on, but I've come to just appreciate as a component of the style. So yeah, it's heavy, it's brutal, it's metal. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things in it that I think work well. And it is a song that, at least in isolation, I haven't heard the rest of Suffocation's discography, but it's a song that I think elevates them above their peers, and they do a lot of things that kind of separates them and puts them outside of the stereotypical traditional sound of death metal and elevates it into something that, you could say, oh, this is some pinnacle death metal. This isn't just iteration. Some of it is. Some of it is peak iteration, but there's also some interesting experimentation going on in it as well. Let me check out some lyrics for this, and then we're going to wrap the video up. So, the context for this one about some of the lyrical themes. Some of that was a little right, but it kind of buried the lead on this. This song is about a dude who likes to murder people. He feels like he's providing a service to the world. He says, I bind to keep, torture one to strengthen, and kill the weak who fail to meet the needs. He thinks that he's helping cull the weak from the world. He says he has an unstable diagnosis, detained to live a victim of myself. Not necessarily something that it seems he wants to do, but feels that he is destined to do. He says, predestined fate nurtures the act of sinning and drives me to, which is the end of most verses. They say it drives me to bind, torture, kill, and then we hit the chorus where he talks about this. He says that his sanity is diminishing, that there's an internal war. He understands that he is going to spend eternity in hell afterwards. He says, I'm damned to be disposed in perpetual fire. But that the deafening voices fuel his actions and drive him to bind, torture, and kill. But he also says that people don't understand him. He says, you judge my world, but your views have been mistaken, for this sickness stems deeper than it seems. As if to say maybe that he's a product of his environment, that those who would condemn him are also the people who created him. It's complex, but I also think it's a bit too simple. It seeks to create a complexity without examining it, instead focusing on the shock value of this serial killer. And I bring up serial killer specifically instead of just calling him a murderer because apparently the song was written from the viewpoint of an infamous killer named Dennis Rader. His most known method of murder was bind, torture, and kill. So yeah, that's what this song is. I don't know if it was designed to create empathy for or simply bring attention to, or I don't know what the purpose was, but that's what it's about. A serial murderer, serial killer, and a song from his perspective. And, as usual, this is my stance on this. I'm not a big fan of it. I think that there might be some worth to it in an academic sense. From an artistic sense, I will always defend somebody's right to make whatever art they want for the most part. There's definitely lines to be crossed, but if you want to write a song about a serial killer and talk about the brutal ways that he murders people, go for it. Man, I guess. But I do wonder if there isn't any element of praise in this. There's definitely an element of empathy, of trying to get into this person's mind. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to condemn it, but I don't know that I definitely don't condone it. Not the kind of lyrics I would write, that's for sure. Particularly because I think the line does get a little bit blurry. Which kind of reminds me, we have covered music about serial killers before, and this topic didn't come up. So I wonder if this is something that I have grown into. I don't know. As usual, you guys give me music that asks me to interrogate my own beliefs and opinions, and I like to think that I grow a lot on this channel, just because you guys keep pushing me to reevaluate who I am. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Suffocation's Bind, Torture, Kill. What do you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you just have your own perspective or opinion on this. Oh, there is this other element, though. It came up a long time ago with None So Vile, Cryptopsy. Just the idea that death metal likes to lean towards shock value and to have their lyrics be as aggressive as their music. So, I mean, it could just be that. I think the choice to use a real life serial murderer instead of just creating up a fictional character who murders people like this, again, blurry line, but musically does fit the aggression and brutality in the lyrics. Um, so yeah, back to the other thing though. If you got comments or whatever, toss it down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.